Marcus Chen wiped sweat from his forehead and squinted at his tour guide's waving arms. The galactic heritage site of Kethmaran stretched before him like something from a fever dream. Purple crystal spires twisted into the orange sky, and floating platforms drifted between massive stone arches that hummed with energy. "Stay with the group, please," called Zixara, their four-armed Calarian tour guide. Her blue skin gleamed as she gestured with all four hands. "These ruins are over 5,000 years old and extremely sacred to 17 different species." Marcus nodded, but his attention had already wandered. This was his first vacation in 3 years, and he'd saved up everything for this 2-week tour of famous alien worlds. Back home on Earth, he fixed broken air conditioners for a living. Here, he was walking through history that predated human civilization. The tour group moved slowly through the main plaza. Most of the other tourists were aliens themselves, tall, graceful Etherians with their flowing robes, short, stocky Durgan engineers taking detailed scans, and a family of Vortani whose crystalline bodies chimed softly as they walked. Marcus tried to keep up, but his human legs weren't built for the low gravity here. Each step sent him bouncing higher than he expected. Plus, the group kept stopping to examine things that looked identical to him. More purple crystal, more floating rocks, more ancient alien writing he couldn't read. "Now we approach the most sacred area of the entire complex," Zixara announced, her voice carrying a reverent tone. "The Throne of Ascension. Legend says that 5,000 years ago, the great Emperor Vorthak sat upon this throne and received visions that united the known galaxy in peace. No being has touched the throne since his death." The group moved forward with hushed whispers. Marcus found himself at the back, struggling with his oversized backpack and the camera equipment he'd bought specifically for this trip. Every alien in the group seemed to glide effortlessly while he clunked along like a tourist from a comedy movie. They entered a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling that showed moving images of stars and planets. In the center, on a raised platform, sat an elegant seat carved from some kind of translucent black stone. It didn't look particularly special to Marcus, just an old chair, really. He'd seen fancier furniture in Earth museums. "The Throne of Ascension," Zixara whispered. "Notice how it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The material is unknown to our science. For 5 millennia, pilgrims have come here to meditate in its presence, but none have dared approach closer than this viewing circle." The tour group formed a respectful semicircle around the platform. Everyone stood in silence, some with their eyes closed, others taking careful pictures from a distance. Marcus raised his camera and snapped a few shots, but the throne just looked like a black blob through his viewfinder. His feet were killing him. These new boots he'd bought for the trip were pinching his toes, and the low gravity was making his ankles feel weird. He shifted his weight and looked around for somewhere to sit down for just a minute. The viewing area had no benches, just empty floor space where everyone else stood comfortably. Marcus noticed a few small platforms around the chamber's edge, but they were clearly meant for decoration, not sitting. Then he spotted it. About 20 feet away, partially hidden by a curved wall, was what looked like a perfect resting spot. A wide, comfortable-looking seat positioned at just the right height. It was in shadow, so he couldn't make out details, but it appeared to be made of the same black stone as everything else here. Marcus glanced back at his tour group. Zixara was explaining something about meditation techniques to the other tourists. Nobody was paying attention to him. Perfect. He quietly shuffled away from the group, following the chamber's curved wall toward the shadowy alcove. His boots squeaked slightly on the smooth floor. But the sound was masked by Zixara's ongoing lecture about ancient spiritual practices. As he got closer, the seat looked even better. It had a high back for support and armrests at just the right height. The black stone had an almost soft appearance, like it might be surprisingly comfortable despite being made of rock. Marcus looked back one more time. The tour group was still focused on Zixara, who was now demonstrating some kind of alien meditation pose. He had maybe 2 minutes before they moved on to the next area. He approached the seat and turned around, preparing to sit down carefully. The stone felt warm, even through his pants, as he lowered himself onto it. The relief was immediate and wonderful. His feet stopped aching, and the seat seemed to mold itself to his body shape. It was the most comfortable chair he'd ever sat in, alien or otherwise. Marcus closed his eyes and let out a quiet sigh of contentment. Then the universe exploded. Light erupted from every surface in the chamber, not the harsh white light of Earth fluorescence, but something deeper and more complex, blues and purples and colors that didn't have names. The air itself began to vibrate with a musical tone so low he felt it in his bones. Marcus's eyes snapped open to see the entire chamber transforming around him. The walls were displaying moving patterns of light that seemed to tell stories without words. The ceiling opened up to show not the real sky outside, but visions of distant galaxies spinning in cosmic dances. Most terrifyingly, streams of energy were flowing from the chair he was sitting in, or rather flowing into it, with him as the focal point. Threads of light connected him to every surface in the room, pulsing with information he couldn't understand but somehow felt. "What have you done?" The shriek came from behind him. Marcus spun around to see Zixara and the entire tour group staring at him in absolute horror. Several of the aliens had fallen to their knees. Others had backed away until they pressed against the chamber walls. My feet hurt. I thought it was a bench," Marcus stammered, starting to stand up. "Don't move!" shouted a new voice. An Etherean in ornate robes was striding into the chamber, flanked by what looked like alien security guards. "Nobody move a single muscle!" But it was too late. The moment Marcus had spoken, the light show intensified. The musical tone grew deeper and more complex, adding harmonies that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. Information flooded his mind, not words, but pure understanding about the chamber, the throne, the ancient civilization that had built this place. He learned that the throne of ascension was never meant to choose rulers or grant visions to the worthy. It was something far more important and dangerous, a test. A challenge left behind by the precursors who had built the galaxy's first interstellar civilization. They had vanished mysteriously, leaving behind only ruins and questions. The throne was their final gift and their final warning. It would remain dormant until someone came along who possessed the specific qualities needed to face what was coming. Someone whose mind could adapt to any situation, whose species had learned to thrive in the face of impossible odds, whose very existence proved that life finds a way against all logic. Someone like a human. Marcus felt the ancient mechanism completing its startup sequence. 5,000 years of waiting were ending. The test was beginning. And he was still wearing the uncomfortable new boots. He called out to the gathering crowd of aliens. "I think I may have accidentally started something." The Etherean in ornate robes stepped forward, his face pale with terror. "You've activated the throne of ascension. The last time this happened, an entire star system was destroyed." "Well," Marcus said, gripping the armrests as energy continued to pour through him. "That's probably something you should have mentioned in the tour brochure." Around them, reality continued to bend and shift. The chamber walls were now showing images of distant worlds, many of them in various states of crisis. Ships fled from something in deep space. Entire planets went dark, and somewhere in the vast cosmos, something ancient and hungry had noticed that the throne of ascension was active again. Marcus Chen, who had come here looking for a peaceful vacation, found himself at the center of a galactic crisis that had been building for 5 millennia. The test was beginning, and failure meant the end of everything. But at least the throne was really comfortable. The chamber filled with more aliens in the next 10 minutes than Marcus had seen in his entire 2-week vacation. Scientists, security officers, religious leaders, and what appeared to be several different kinds of military personnel streamed through the entrance. All of them stopped dead when they saw him still sitting on the throne. "Has anyone tried asking him to get off?" suggested a practical-looking Durgan engineer. "The human cannot leave the throne now," announced High Priestess Velthara, the Etherean in ornate robes. "The Ascension Protocol has begun. The ancient texts are very clear about this. Once activated, the throne must complete its purpose or what?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. "Or it will consume the life force of whoever activated it and use that energy to call forth the devourers from the deep void," she said matter-of-factly. Marcus gripped the armrests tighter. "Sorry, the what now?" Zixara stepped forward, all 4 of her arms trembling. "The devourers. Ancient texts speak of creatures that consumed the precursor civilization. The throne was built as a final test, a way to identify beings capable of stopping them when they inevitably returned." "And you didn't think to put up a sign?" Marcus asked. "Like danger, cosmic horror summoning device, do not sit?" A new voice interrupted their conversation. "The human makes a valid point about safety protocols." Everyone turned to see Admiral Crosseth, a massive Vortani whose crystalline body rang like a bell with each step. His species were known throughout the galaxy for their logical approach to problems and their complete inability to understand humor. "Admiral," High Priestess Velthara bowed slightly, "I wasn't expecting military involvement so quickly." "The throne's activation sent energy pulses across 17 star systems," Admiral Crosseth replied. "Every sensor array in this sector detected it. More concerning, we've also detected response signals from deep space. Something out there is answering the call." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the throne's energy. "How long do we have?" "Unknown. The response signals originated from beyond our galaxy's edge. Even at faster-than-light speeds, it could take weeks for anything to reach us. Or—" The Admiral's crystalline features darkened. "The precursor technology may allow them to travel much faster than our physics suggests possible." "Right," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "So what exactly is this test supposed to prove? Because I should mention up front that I'm not really qualified for saving the galaxy. I fix air conditioners." High Priestess Velthara consulted a tablet covered in flowing alien script. "According to the texts, the throne will present 3 trials. Each one tests a different aspect of the candidate's nature. The first trial judges adaptability, the second measures courage, and the third—" She paused, looking confused. "What's the third?" several voices asked at once. The translation is unclear. The word could mean stubbornness or persistence, or possibly annoying refusal to give up when any reasonable being would quit. "That last one sounds pretty human," admitted Zixara. As if responding to their conversation, the throne began to pulse with brighter light. The chamber walls displayed new images, not the distant galaxies from before, but what looked like a testing environment. A vast space filled with floating platforms, energy barriers, and obstacles that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. "The first trial is beginning," whispered the High Priestess. Marcus felt the throne's energy flowing through him more strongly now. Information downloaded directly into his brain, not words or images, but pure understanding. He suddenly knew exactly what he was supposed to do, even though it made no sense. "I need to get to that platform," he said, pointing at a floating disc about 50 feet away in the trial space. "But I can't leave the throne until I complete all 3 trials." "How is that possible?" asked Admiral Crosseth. Marcus grinned, and for the first time since sitting down, he felt confident. "Because humans are really good at cheating." He stood up carefully, maintaining contact with the throne by keeping one hand on the armrest. The energy connection held. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out something that made every alien in the room step back in alarm. "Is that a projectile weapon?" Admiral Crosseth's voice rang with concern. "It's a selfie stick," Marcus explained, extending the telescoping rod to its full length. "I bought it at the spaceport gift shop." Before anyone could ask what he was planning, Marcus grabbed the throne's armrest with one hand and swung the selfie stick out toward the floating platform with the other. The stick extended just far enough for him to hook it around a small protrusion on the platform's edge. "You can't be serious," said Zixara. "The throne wants adaptability," Marcus replied, testing his grip. "Human tourists are basically experts at adapting to situations we're completely unprepared for." He swung out over the void between the throne and the platform, using the selfie stick like the world's most ridiculous zip line. The energy connection held, streaming from the throne to his hand to the platform in a continuous flow of light. The watching aliens erupted in surprised chatter. Several species didn't have words for what they were witnessing. Marcus landed on the platform with a thud and immediately understood what came next. The platform began moving, carrying him through an obstacle course that seemed designed to test every possible form of adaptation. Gravity shifted in random directions. The air became thick as soup, then thin as a mountaintop. Temperature swung from desert heat to Arctic cold. But humans had evolved on a planet that regularly tried to kill them with weather, predators, diseases, and natural disasters. Marcus found himself instinctively adjusting to each challenge. When gravity reversed, he used his tourism experience of walking on upside-down observation decks. When the air thickened, he held his breath like he was swimming. When it got cold, he zipped up his jacket and kept moving. "Remarkable," Admiral Crosseth observed. "His species appears to have biological adaptations for surviving almost any environment." "Not really," said Zixara, who had guided human tourists before. "They just have this weird ability to treat any life-threatening situation as a minor inconvenience." The first trial ended when Marcus reached another platform that connected back to the throne. He'd been gone for nearly an hour, but it felt like minutes. The energy flow from the throne had kept him energized and focused throughout the challenge. As he settled back into the throne, the chamber walls showed new images. This time, the trial space looked like a battlefield. Massive creatures with too many teeth moved through a landscape of fire and shadow. The message was clear. The second trial would test his courage against impossible odds. "This is where it gets interesting," Marcus muttered, checking his remaining tourist supplies. "Because humans are also really good at being too stupid to know when we should be scared." High Priestess Velthara looked up from her ancient texts. "The second trial has claimed every being who attempted it over the past 5 millennia. "Yeah, but they weren't human," Marcus replied, already planning his approach. "We're the species that looked at fire and thought, 'I bet I could cook with this.' We saw horses and decided to ride them. We looked up at the moon and figured out how to go there just to prove we could." "Your point?" asked Admiral Crosseth. Marcus grinned as the second trial began to activate around him. "My point is that dangerous situations are basically our hobby." The chamber walls dissolved, revealing the battlefield in all its terrifying glory. Creatures the size of buildings prowled between obstacles that could crush a ship. Energy weapons fired randomly from hidden positions. The platform Marcus would need to reach stood at the center of what looked like certain death. But as he prepared to face impossible odds with nothing but tourist equipment and human stubbornness, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected. He was actually starting to enjoy this. The energy from the throne surged through him as he stepped into the second trial. Behind him, dozens of aliens watched in fascination as a confused human tourist prepared to fight monsters that had stopped galactic empires. And in the deep void beyond their galaxy, Something ancient and hungry continued its journey toward their location, drawn by the throne's signal like a shark following blood in the water. Marcus stared at the creatures prowling the battlefield and realized his vacation had officially taken a turn for the worse. The monsters looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a tank and given it anger management issues. Their claws sparked against the metal floor as they paced between barriers that glowed with defensive energy. The second trial requires you to reach the central platform without being killed, High Priestess Velthara called from the chamber. Previous candidates attempted to fight their way through. "How'd that work out for them?" Marcus asked, pulling his camera strap tighter. "They were eaten." "Right." Marcus studied the battlefield more carefully. "What if I don't fight them?" The question seemed to confuse every alien in the room. Admiral Crosseth's crystalline features chimed with what might have been laughter. "How does one cross a battlefield without fighting?" "Same way you get through a crowded tourist attraction without pushing," Marcus replied. "You wait for the right moment, move when there's an opening, and try not to attract attention." He watched the creatures' movement patterns for several minutes. They were predators. But they were also following routes between specific points, like security guards on patrol or wild animals protecting territory. They weren't randomly violent. They were defending something. Marcus opened his backpack and pulled out his emergency snacks. Every human tourist carried emergency snacks. It was basically a survival instinct. "What are those?" asked Zixara. "Granola bars, universal peace offering." Marcus unwrapped one and took a bite. The sweet, nutty flavor reminded him of home. "Plus, I haven't eaten since breakfast, and it's hard to be brave when you're hungry." He dropped down from the throne's platform onto the battlefield floor. The nearest creature immediately turned toward him, muscles tensing for attack. Marcus held up the granola bar and took another bite, making no threatening moves. The creature paused, confused. Its enhanced senses detected no aggression, no challenge to its territory, just a strange bipedal being eating something that smelled interesting. Marcus slowly broke off a piece of granola bar and tossed it halfway between himself and the creature. Then he sat down cross-legged and continued eating, completely ignoring the monster. This was apparently so unexpected that the creature approached cautiously to investigate the offered food. After a careful sniff, it devoured the granola piece and looked at Marcus with what might have been hope. "You're feeding them?" Admiral Crosseth's voice carried a note of disbelief. "My mom always said the best way to handle angry animals is to give them space and food," Marcus replied, tossing another piece to a second creature that had wandered over. "Also works pretty well with angry customs officials." Within 20 minutes, Marcus had a small crowd of formerly terrifying monsters sitting around him like oversized pets. They weren't evil or violent. They were just hungry and territorial. A few granola bars and some non-threatening behavior had turned them into curious companions. When Marcus stood up and walked toward the central platform, they followed him like a parade escort. The energy barriers parted to let them through, recognizing that the trial had been completed successfully. "The second trial tests courage," observed High Priestess Velthara as Marcus reached the central platform. But his approach showed a different kind of bravery. The courage to be vulnerable rather than violent. Marcus patted one of the creatures on its massive head before returning to the throne. "Humans learned a long time ago that making friends is usually easier than making enemies. Plus, everything's less scary once you feed it." As he settled back into the throne, the battlefield dissolved and the chamber walls displayed the third and final trial. What Marcus saw made his stomach drop. It wasn't an obstacle course or a battle. It was a simple room containing a single pedestal with a glowing red button. Above the button, alien text scrolled continuously in what looked like a countdown. "The final trial," High Priestess Velthara read from her ancient texts. the candidate must demonstrate the ultimate quality required to stop the devourers. They must prove their willingness to continue trying even when success appears impossible. "What happens when I push the button?" Marcus asked. "Unknown. The texts only say that you must keep pushing it, no matter what happens, until the trial ends. Every previous candidate gave up before completion." "How long did they try?" "The longest attempt lasted 18 hours. Marcus nodded and stepped into the trial room. The button was large and red and looked exactly like every emergency stop button he'd ever seen on Earth machinery. The countdown above it showed symbols he couldn't read, but the urgency was unmistakable. He pushed the button. Pain shot through his entire body like touching a live electrical wire. The button reset instantly, and the countdown continued. Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed it again. More pain. The button reset. The countdown kept going. He pushed it a third time, then a fourth. Each push brought agony that made him want to quit, but the countdown never stopped. Marcus realized what this trial was really testing: the human ability to keep doing something painful and pointless for no better reason than someone said it needed to be done. "Oh, come on," he muttered, pushing the button again. "This is just Tuesday for anyone who's ever had a job." Hours passed. Marcus's arms ached, his vision blurred from exhaustion, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to stop. But he kept pushing the button. When he got too tired to stand, he sat down and kept pushing. When his right hand cramped up, he switched to his left hand. "Why doesn't he quit?" Admiral Crosseth asked after Marcus had been at it for 12 hours. "Because he's human," Zixara replied, watching through the chamber displays. "I've guided their tour groups before. They'll keep trying to take pictures even when the camera is obviously broken. They'll keep walking even when their feet are bleeding. They'll keep asking questions even when no one has answers." "That seems inefficient," observed the Admiral. "It's the most efficient thing in the universe," said High Priestess Velthera softly. "Watch." At hour 15, something changed. The pain from pushing the button began to lessen. At hour 18, Marcus broke the previous record, but he barely noticed. He was focused entirely on the task, pushing the button with mechanical determination. At hour 22, the countdown display flickered and showed different symbols. At hour 24, the button itself began to glow differently. At hour 26, Marcus realized the room around him was changing. The walls were displaying images of space, showing the approaching devourers for the first time. They were worse than anyone had imagined. Not creatures at all, but vast machines that consumed entire stars for fuel. Planet-sized constructs that had already eaten their way through distant galaxies, leaving nothing but empty void behind them. But the throne was showing him something else now. As he continued pushing the button, energy was building up throughout the ancient precursor network. Stations that had been dormant for millennia were coming online. Weapons that could crack planets were charging up. The entire galaxy's defensive systems were awakening. And they were all connected to this one button that Marcus refused to stop pushing. At hour 30, the Devourers reached the galaxy's edge and met the first line of precursor defense stations. Ancient weapons fired with the power of supernovas, turning the void-spanning machines into cosmic debris. At hour 32, Marcus finally understood what the trial was really about. The precursors hadn't vanished. They'd built themselves into the galaxy itself, becoming a defensive system that would activate only when someone proved they had the most important quality needed to protect life: the absolute refusal to give up. At hour 34, the last devourer was destroyed, and the button finally stayed down when Marcus pushed it. He stumbled out of the trial room and collapsed into the throne, exhausted but victorious. Around him, the chamber displayed images of celebration from across the galaxy as species realized they were safe. "The trials are complete," announced High Priestess Velthara, her voice filled with awe. The throne has accepted humanity as the new guardians of galactic civilization. Does that come with dental? Marcus asked weakly. Admiral Crosseth approached the throne with what appeared to be respect. Human Marcus Chen, your species has proven itself worthy of joining the Galactic Council. You've shown adaptability that surpasses our greatest engineers, courage that puts our finest warriors to shame, and persistence that really annoys everyone until stuff gets fixed, Marcus finished. Yeah, that's pretty much humanity in a nutshell. As the energy from the throne finally faded, Marcus stood up on shaky legs. The ancient mechanism had completed its 5,000-year mission. The galaxy was safe, humanity had a new role in interstellar civilization, and he still had 4 days left on his vacation. So, he said to Zixara, does this mean we can skip the pottery demonstration tomorrow? Because after today, I could really use some time at the beach. The tour guide looked at the human who had just saved the galaxy and was now worried about his vacation schedule. It was, she reflected, probably the most human response possible. I think we can arrange something, she said with all 4 arms spread in amusement. Though you might want to prepare for some attention when word gets out about this. Marcus groaned. Please tell me it won't be worse than the time I accidentally became internet famous for falling into that fountain. It would be much, much worse. But that's another story entirely. For now, Marcus Chen just wanted to find a comfortable chair that wasn't connected to any ancient cosmic defense systems, put his feet up, and maybe grab another granola bar. The galaxy's newest guardian had earned a break.